survivors, and welcome to First Aid Spray, a Resident Evil podcast by fans for fans. This is episode 23, and in this edition we'll be stepping into the bizarro world of unreleased games in the series with beta builds. Resident Evil 1.5. My name is Syniac, you can just call me Cy, and joining me on the panel this week, rumour has it his birth name is Grant Bittman, but thanks to a deep poll we know him better as Firebutton Steve Valance.
Hello.
There were plans to have him return triumphantly on a trusty steed, but the zombie horse sadly got cut. It's Steamforged Games Sherwin Matthews.
Alright guys.
And like Robert Kendo, we were going to kill him off in the first 5 minutes of the episode, but perhaps we'll keep him around. Dunno, maybe change his name to John. It's Boy Wonder, Adam Russell Reeves.
Hello!
This episode of the podcast, like all others, was recorded live in our Discord server. Join now to hear the podcast early and unedited, as well as engage with our community, contribute to the show and other upcoming projects, and be informed first of everything going on behind the scenes. You can find a link to the server in the description of the podcast or on our social media accounts. Housekeeping is always the first thing we do, so first things first, special shout out to our Patreon supporters, so our newest supporters. Thank you to Arkheim and thank you to Ploppy54 for keeping the lights on and making sure everything we do is on an upward slant and helping us create better content for everybody. In terms of new content, in fact, new on the YouTube, we have the 5 additions to RE4 video that Steve lovingly put together. That one was a bit of an albatross, but it is here now and it's wonderful, and it's wonderfully timed as well, considering the RE4 remake discussion, but we promise it was in the plans long before that talk started happening. Jeering begins. And we also put out recently a Let's Play of Resident Evil 3 The Board Game's Commercial District scenario, which was fun with the folks here with me today. We played for over an hour, give you more of an insight into the changes that game brings over Resident Evil 2 The Board Game. So go check that one out as well. And also on our YouTube, we have been uploading Resident Evil The Beginning. We're 3 episodes into the audio drama based on the 1997 book we talked about on the podcast before, but it's gone down surprisingly well. So if you haven't checked that out yet, do check out those 3 episodes that are out. And every Sunday at 8 p.m. British Standard Time, the next episodes pop. There's 7 in total, and then after there, who knows what the future holds. But make sure you're watching that as well. That's all of our news out of the way. So let's move on to the Resident Evil headlines.
So, first up, the latest update brings Nikolai to Resident Evil Resistance, and alongside him, the BOW Nemesis.
Yeah, he's a fast boy. I played a few games. I think I might have even played one game as Nikolai, just with our group on the server, just to get a feel for it. The way he's set up makes sense to me. I'm enjoying it. Nemesis is really fun to play around with. Bringing the rocket launcher and the crazy fast sprint. Steve, I know you've got some games in against, or maybe even as, some Nikolais. How do you feel about him?
I'm going to just give a quick shout out to the crew, the real Ark Thompson, the Luigi, the Choji. They were happily my victims as my first few games playing as Nikolai. He's insanely overpowered. He's like, in gameplay terms, he's somewhere between Daniel and Spencer, in that he's like mostly ranged weapons, but his BOW is essentially a more gimmicky version of the Tyrant. It's Nemesis, not surprising. I honestly feel like Nikolai, if you know how to aim, is a great asset. If you can't operate his guns, he's garbage. Like, his BOW is not going to turn the tide on its own.
Right,
Nemesis can't turn it on.
That's fair. If you know what you're doing with the combination of traps and turrets and stuff like that, you can go up against some pretty nasty Nikolai players already. Most games you're going to get right now with him just being recently released are going to be Nikolai games, so played many. But every now and then you do get a player that's a little bit out of their depth, maybe, because a lot of the other masterminds use spawning of creatures, and that's not really Nikolai's jam so much.
Mastermind.
Adam level mastermind, yeah. Have you played any Resistance games recently, Adam?
I haven't been meaning to, but I have not.
No, well, you can always, you and everyone else is interested, can always help the server. There is a Resistance looking for group room. So if anyone's out there wants to play some Resistance games, pop in the server, and there'll be at least PS4 players around. I'm sure there's some PC players. I'm not so sure about Xbox, but there'll be people.
Curious site. If you had to put like Nikolai into so many words, how would you rate him overall compared to the other masterminds?
I'm not really sure. I'd need more experience playing as him, I think, but I get his gimmick more immediately than I did Spencer's. I really struggled to pick up Spencer, but he's similar in that way that he's different and more technically minded like Spencer is, but in a different way. So I would say, yeah, it's a bit more. It takes a bit more thinking rather than which me and you and Steve, we do basically the same thing where you just find the room and load it up with creatures. The kitchen sink approach.
Yeah.
Whereas this one is a bit more. I don't know, not proactive, but constantly looking at what's going to be where you're going to need to be, and setting up. I've watched games where Mastermind set up like 3 rooms at a time with Nikolai because of the stuff like turrets and traps. So yeah, it's very active.
I find him like if Daniel was Ryu, he's very much the Ken in a way,
right?
Like there's similarities but differences. I would argue that if you're planning on picking him up, this is a little tip. Go into your character custom deck and maybe modify what kind of monsters you can spawn. You don't need a million versions of the rifle. You just need the turret, the high-powered one, maybe throw in an armored zombie. It seems to work on the server at least,
Yeah, no, that's fair. So yeah, expect to see Nikolai games fairly often at the moment. And then I guess around this time next month, we'll be getting our next update, which it seems like it might be a new map. So that's pretty exciting.
Right then. So our next bit of news. This is going to be a heavy one, I believe. But the PlayStation blog drops a small hint regarding Resident Evil 4 remake and some rather big lore changes.
Yeah, so I don't have the thing in front of me. I should have probably brought that up. But effectively, in an interview with RE3 and Resistance people behind the scenes talking about Nikolai coming to Resistance, obviously, and how they approach Nemesis and stuff, they basically dropped the bombshell that any alpha parasite is Umbrella's kind of parasite that's based on the idea of Las Plagas, which means that they've encountered it at this point in the canon. And the NE parasite is sort of inspired by Las Plagas or based on data from Las Plagas, which obviously is an idea to tie the game to RE4, which again pretty much confirms that remake's happening. But unfortunately also it makes some big interesting holes in the canon. I've been very flip-floppy on it. Steve, I know you were a bit sort of on the fence with it at the moment.
I'm still I want to see where they'll go with it. I can't just write off immediately, but right now, it's very peculiar. I think the origins of the Nemesis parasite are kind of grey, aren't they? Right. Umbrella Europe makes it. We don't know where from.
Right.
In my mind, I'm going, okay, maybe, because in Umbrella Chronicles, Wesker steals UMF 03, their mainframe, everything. So if they knew about Las Plagas in some degree, he then has a reason to why he wants to send Ada into Europe in the first place. But then again, surely that would mean that Umbrella probably had samples on hand that he could have just stolen as well in the first place. You know what I'm saying?
Right, that's the tricky part. I don't mind the idea. It's almost like they went, hey, yeah, Umbrella Europe, Las Plagas Europe. It makes sense, yeah. But then you got to think about it a bit more deep, like that. Somebody suggested maybe, I think it was Sunny, in fact, suggested that maybe they're looking for the control Plaga rather than the regular Plaga, and that's why he sends Ada in. There's only so much data they have, and they need control Plaga data rather than regular old Plaga, maybe. But it's very possible they haven't thought about it all that much.
It feels like they've just placed a minefield in front of themselves, narratively speaking.
Yeah. And it's not great considering the last couple of games with the remakes have been very mixed received in terms of the canon, at the very least.
They're kind of light on everywhere. Lore. The remakes are way more light on lore than the classics.
It's also the problem is the lore that they do go into. It's very similar, but also the changes it makes are also drastically different. Just like the big obvious one is the RPD. They moved into that building in the 60s instead of the 80s. It's like, well, that's it. kind of pointless change, kind of insignificant.
Right.
Kind of insignificant, but it doesn't match up. And they do a lot of that. And then something like this drops. And over the weekend, it's been a fair amount of fallout to it. I don't know where...
I in all honesty, for me, it's kind of a non-issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be what it's going to be. Like, there's nothing you can do to really stop it. And like we've seen with the other remakes, I feel like they haven't invalidated the originals. They are a separate world, really, and for me that's fine to do with
right.
4 in this sense. It might be a bit more interesting.
Yeah, I think I'm going to land somewhere.
In all honesty, I prefer all of the remake. Not prefer them. I like that the remakes are all different because it's not me just playing the same game.
Sure,
but nicer, you know. So I'm kind of fine with it.
I think I'm going to land somewhere close to where you were, Adam. I think. For me, it's important to understand. Obviously, we all know that Resident Evil certainly sort of seems to come in batches. If you look at the traditional thing, let's ignore the remakes for a moment. I'll circle back around on those. We have the original series of games. Then you kind of have the games that started with 4 and kind of played through the next bits. And then now you have 7, which is very much a distinctive engine itself again.
Mm-hmm.
And those games all feel like they really belong, if I'm entirely truthful, to 3 very different franchises. There are some commonalities on them. It's almost like Leon S. Kennedy just rocked up inside a completely different franchise, to be honest, to my mind, when it comes to Resident Evil 4 onwards. And I think that's fine. Like, obviously, everyone knows that every Resident Evil fan has their own jumping on point for what the game is, and there's obviously lots of debate going on as to what the true Resident Evil game is or anything else. But one thing that feels really disjointed and always has to my mind is the lore that actually connects those sort of 3 groups together, especially when you look at 7. There's a real gap in there.
Right.
And I think maybe there's an interesting point where you could see that Capcom are actually open to and trying to make a more consistent narrative with the remakes that then will actually carry on all the way through and actually register and actually then thus create kind of something which actually has got some consistency to it and people can look at and go, that's cohesive. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of goes through. And with that in mind, I mean, obviously there are going to be some sort of small changes and some larger ones. But we don't actually know that necessarily until we've actually seen these play out, wherever the remakes eventually stop.
Right. This is very true. And in terms of sort of like the disconnected games, it's always been the case that sort of supplemental material or later installments sort of tie them in further. So in the case of 4, stuff like 5 and Darkside Chronicles, it made it feel like it belonged a little bit more. But yeah, when they take that sudden shift like they did with 4 and like they've done with 7, it is sort of like, whoa, very left field. And I can understand this is a unique situation in the fact that they are now able to, let's make those ties before we make the game. My view is Remake 3 has lore changes. So Remake 4, of course, is going to have lore changes. Really, it comes down to what is Capcom's standpoint on this. The most recent thing they've said about the canon is that all the games happen all at the same time, even if they contradict each other. It's all the same universe, which is where the problem lies in terms of people are very heavily into the story aspect and trying to follow it along. Their previous statement had been, all the games take place unless they contradict each other, in which case the originals take precedent. What they really need to do is just put their foot down on something and say, because I will be happy with this, I'll be totally fine with these changes, go nuts if you just tell us what is what. And by that I mean, just tell us there's 2 universes. It really doesn't have to be that complicated. That is the logical way to do this. You can carry on making these games and having them all separate, and you can go crazy with it. And you can also not upset the hardcore fan base that spends years upon years writing documentation about the old story and stuff. They just need to just step up and say something clear.
You're talking Star Wars canon and Star Wars Legends, basically, but for the Resident Evil universe.
Right, something like that. Resident Evil Legends. I don't see why there's a problem with it.
Do Capcom really care? That's the thing. Do they? I mean, obviously they care about their games, but are they really bothered about what people are like? Well, which one is the correct lore? They're just like, well, this is just Resident Evil 3 and this is Resident Evil 2, and we change them as we see fit. And just like George Lucas is like, well, this is how I wanted it to be, so I changed it, kind of thing. So who knows?
Right.
See, part of me still part of me still takes the remakes as faulty retellings, or or not, unreliable narrations on some part, be it the originals or the remakes, just to try and make them fit. Because obviously, there's details that, as we've already pointed out, don't quite fit each mold. But if they just have different universes, as I've said it before on the podcast, haven't we? We've got like Transformers, and we've got Transformers Animated, we've got Star Wars Legends, we've got Star Wars Canon. That's probably the easiest way, but that's going to make people upset.
I don't know. I mean, everyone obviously has different viewpoints about it, and like you say, Capcom probably a certain degree of it they don't particularly care too much. There are also fans out there that don't care too much, and there are also fans. I've seen some people, and it's sad to see people in the community being like, "Yeah, I think I'm done," which is a shame. And that's how heavily invested in the story they are over anything else, and that's fair enough. But for me, I'm just sort of like bumbling along.
Should have been done by Resident Evil 6 if that's the case.
I mean,
I'm bumbling along, sort of in blissful ignorance until we get to a point where we can't turn back, and then they make a decision and they go, well, the remakes are all canon. There's no other way now.
But then that's still up to you. You could just be like, well, that's not the way I see it.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm trying to do.
My canon,
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, there's a remake timeline. That is my viewpoint.
That's how I live my life. So I have the Brad Vickers canon just up in my head. Nobody else. It doesn't matter.
Oh, right. So our last piece of news, and this actually probably has pertinence to how much Capcom really does care about the franchise, in my opinion. Capcom have updated their current Resident Evil series sales figures.
Yeah, so Capcom's website, they have what they call the Platinum titles, which is titles that have sold over 1 million units, and they're all listed in order. Monster Hunter World, still very much the best-selling Capcom game of all time. But the new sales figures have come in, and we've seen some interesting shifts. So just doing the top 5, let's say. So the top 5 Capcom best-selling games. 5 is the Resident Evil 2 remake, not overly surprising, 6.6 million. What is quite interesting is that 4 is now Resident Evil 7, which is 7.5, which ties it with the PS3 and Xbox 360 versions of Resident Evil 6. Not the HD ports, but it has already caught up to RE6, and despite what you think about that game's quality, it sold pretty damn well. And then 0.1 of a million higher is Resident Evil 5 at 7.6, the original release on PS3 and Xbox 360. So that's really interesting, and obviously Monster Hunter on top. By the time we get the next sales figures through, we could really see some shifts in terms of what is the best-selling Resident Evil games. But at the time of speaking, RE5 still holding out as the best-selling, and then RE6, and now RE7, and then Remake 2. So that's pretty cool.
As if you wanted any more reasoning as to why these remakes and changes are happening, you look at the top-selling Resident Evils for them, and they're obviously not following exactly what those games are like, but they are pushing more towards the actiony kind of,
the over-the-shoulder.
Seven obviously isn't actiony, but
yeah, that's the
remakes
one.
are a bit more actiony, and it feels like they've kind of latched onto their current winning thing. I don't see it stopping until we get another debacle. Even though 6 was one of their best sellers, I think they know it wasn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
for the series as a whole,
as well as it sold even upon release. 7 was the next major title, which is hugely different. So they do listen to the actual reaction from people, not just scores and sales figures. Resident Evil 7, though, I mean, that's really interesting to see how high that could potentially go. And, very hopeful that sort of, personally speaking, obviously everyone has their own different views on it, but personally speaking, hopefully that informs more of the future. That means that with it rising up, perhaps we'll be seeing more of the first-person games. We can only assume that Resident Evil 8 is in first-person. That's what the rumours say, but, we can't say with any concrete fact. But that seems reasonably likely, considering that it's still selling pretty well.
I would hope so. I feel that maybe questions were raised with how well the remakes did. They might have been like, well, wait a minute, this third-person over-the-shoulder engine is being very well received. But I would hope first-person for 8 as well.
Yeah, it's well, obviously the other one is we'll see how well Remake 2 does because it's only 1 million behind RE7 and there's a 2-year difference in release there, so who knows. Well, that ought to tie up the news, so let's move on to what is going to be a very exciting episode with the main subject at hand, which is Resident Evil 1.5.
And now, reading the file Male Nurse's Diary from Resident Evil Outbreak, Geo1776, who you can find on Twitter at KNCrespan.
We should have disposed of that nasty crap much earlier. It got Robert's body as well, even though I made sure to seal up the body in an airtight bag. The ammo and the spare gun we should keep here for security ran out. Hell, bullets didn't even dent it. What in the hell am I gonna do now? The bite wound from that thing just won't clot. I've lost so much blood that I feel nauseous and dizzy. Wherever I go or hide, that damn thing is always on my heels. It just moves so incredibly fast. Come to think of it, in the beginning it was a lot slower. It's a predator, and I think the smell of blood is exciting it. I'm done for. I'll be the next.
Okay, so this marks the beginning of a brand new series of episodes. With video games, you often get examples of games that were cut at some point in development, and Resident Evil has several of these. What it has that I find surprising compared to perhaps other franchises, it has a few that have got quite far, or at least some amount of it has been shown to the public, so it kind of holds in the memory, especially the memory of the internet. And the place to start with that is not just the earliest game, but also perhaps the most prevalent of all of these. I think the one that sticks out to everyone, which is Resident Evil 1.5. So I guess the history lesson, because as we are inclusive to all levels of Resident Evil fans, some people out there might not know what we're talking about when we talk about Resident Evil 1.5. So immediately following the release of the original game, work began on a sequel in the following summer of '96 with a new director, Hideki Kamiya, on Resident Evil 2. This game was in production for around 9 months or so. It was cancelled in February '97, even though the game was due to release about 3 months later in May, and the entire team went back to the drawing board. And big changes happened, blah, 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 blah. Next September in '98, you get Resident Evil 2. It comes out, and everyone, it's fully aware that it's been delayed so long, but what they see isn't necessarily what they had been shown previously, especially when we're looking at stuff like the internet, when people are starting to talk about magazines and stuff that they've seen before. And this previous version of Resident Evil 2 that got to about 70% completion before it was canned, thereby got the title Resident Evil 1.5. So let's, I guess, start with everyone's earliest memories of 1.5. What do you remember the first time you saw it, encountered it? Sherwin, you're like an OG fan, you played the original game. Did you ever see any 1.5 stuff in magazines or video footage before RE2?
Yeah, 1,000 years ago when I was young, we were all super excited for RE2. Everyone was insanely excited. I think everybody who owned a PlayStation had played Resident Evil 1 or Resident Evil as it was then, and couldn't wait to see Resident Evil 2. And then we started seeing kind of various bits of footage, because you're right, this is really a time before the internet was really a thing, he says, showing his age. And it was something where we kind of magazines and demo discs and stuff, and random kind of this is like new information from Japan or something or other was really kind of the thing that kind of started filtering through. And I think I was kind of lucky. I actually knew a couple of people who worked in the magazine industry. Like if you can hunt it down, the very first episode of the UK Dreamcast magazine, I'm actually in it.
That's amazing.
Talking to them about random WWF games, the type of stuff. But so I kind of got to actually see some trailers and things, or some more some actual footage. Yeah, the same sort of blurry stuff that you would see or whatever ahead of time, and was insanely excited about it. Like it was literally something where we were all just getting so hyped about this thing. And I think that's part of what the charm is, and I won't necessarily go into this one too much because obviously you guys want to talk about your own recollections, and we can kind of sum up with it all. But I think it's more so much like it's that amazing thing that almost was but never. But it's this amazing Easter egg that kind of disappeared. It's almost like a fable, right?
Right.
And I think that was the charm of it, because what we saw looked amazing, and we wouldn't properly realize until probably sometime around about Code Veronica in terms of how the enemies moved around, and in terms of kind of the what felt like the sort of visceral nature of it.
Right.
And I feel like that as a result, when Resident Evil 2 landed, no one was disappointed with Resident Evil 2, but it was such a different beast that it kind of cemented this mythic status for it. And I think that's what was so cool about it.
Especially in the early days of the internet as well, when there were forums and Resident Evil. It was, you don't have it so much now, and I think we talked about this before. But like fan sites for everything, people would make websites about the thing that they loved, and there were so many Resident Evil fan sites. And I used to frequent them way back in the day, and there would just be collections of all this stuff with everyone discussing what exactly this game was, because it was information was harder to come by then, and it was slower to spread. But with the advent of the internet, everyone sort of came together and pulled the sort of resources of what they had heard about it and whatever. And even to the point where there was folklore. People said stuff about the game that turns out it wasn't true. My uncle played it, blah blah blah, and all that. Adam, what was your earliest memories of 1.5? Do you remember the first time you sort of came across the existence of this fabled game?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't come across it as obviously as 1.5. I'm kind of in the same boat as Sherwin where I was kind of old enough to kind of be at the perfect age to be kind of into gaming at this point. And a lot of games mags, Capcom really wanted to kind of I think get on top of the hype of Resident Evil 1, so they showed a lot of this before it was really ready. If you go back to games magazines of the time, there is screenshots of Elza and stuff saying Resident Evil 2. So that's kind of how I was exposed to Resident Evil 2 at the time, obviously. I remember getting Resident Evil 2 and being like, oh, this it's not like I saw pictures of it. But that was really all I knew of it. I wasn't super aware of my Resident Evil fandom at that point was just really liking the games, and that was pretty much it. So I wasn't super aware until later on the mythicality of Resident Evil 1.5.
Right, interesting.
How much of a thing it was. Yeah, I remember kind of really reading up on it prior to the build getting out into the public. So I just had access to the man spider shots and stuff, all of the kind of stuff before people got their hands on it, and being pretty fascinated by it then.
Steve, what was your earliest memories of the Resident Evil 2 beta, as it's also known?
So my earliest memories are, I'm thinking it was a strategy guide. There was a PlayStation compilation called the Black Book or something. And it was it only had Resident Evil 1 in it, and it was teasing RE2, and it's prologue chapter, so to speak. And it was just a single screenshot saying, look at Resident Evil 2 coming out in 1997. And it's an image of Elza in the foyer with the police station fighting zombies. Didn't really twig that this wasn't the RE2 I remember until I'd already gotten RE2, the real game, into my hands, and then look back at this guide for laughs, because it's got some hilarious descriptions on how to beat monsters with knives, but that's a different thing for a different story. And then when I realised that is not Claire Redfield, that's a blonde lady in a red jumpsuit, that's when I started digging a little deeper. And it wasn't until early days of the internet kind of stuff, and I found Bioflames. I think it was Bioflames.
Yeah, they were a big site for it.
They dropped a big lump of pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's pretty much where I started to look into 1.5 as a whole proper. I mean, there's been Facebook pages since the Proto Road Network kind of built on Resident Evil 1.5 page. That's where a lot of my stuff came from.
Right.
But yeah, I've always been interested, just never really dipped my toe in excessively until the more recent news I'm sure we're going to touch on.
Right. For me, it was sort of similar in the sense that my Resident Evil fandom started to grow at a point where I would start looking at these fan sites, and I was aware of the first few games, and Resident Evil 2 is my entry point, and it was my favourite then, obviously very much so now. So to see this sort of like ghost of the game, this weird version of it, was just interesting and was unlike anything I'd ever heard of. I'd never heard of a game. I don't know, I guess I never thought about, something got so far along and being cancelled before, and it doesn't really happen to the extent that this game was, 78%, they say, and then trashed unceremoniously. It was just such a strange anomaly. And it was familiar, but there's so many different differences, and we'll break it down piece by piece. Steve, as you mentioned there, so the sort of interest in this game and the mystery went on for years and years and years. And there was, again, rumours and talk that there was a playable version that existed out there. And the story is out there for you to read. Someone made a book about the level of internet drama that Resident Evil 1.5 produced. It's insane. People trying to buy a playable copy that someone claimed they have, and it's mental, and we don't necessarily need to get into all of that. But in 2013, after all these years, a playable version leaked onto the internet, which kind of blew it open a bit more because everyone could capture their own footage and get a real look around. And since 2013, a delightful group of modders have been working to make it more playable, closer to perhaps the vision it was meant to be, filling in gaps where they have to. They've been making backgrounds out of screenshots and stuff like that. It's crazy the amount of work that's gone into it over the years. So shout out to Martin Biohazard and all those guys that are working on that. The Magic Zombie Door version. It gets updates every now and then. The most recent one was in December, so Steve and I have played through some of it quite recently as well, so we'll be able to talk about actually playing 1.5 as up to date as the fans have made it, at least. But let's first talk about the way the game looks, I guess. Shoen, you're the super fan. What strikes you in terms of the differences between the looks of this and RE2?
Do you know, it's really interesting, isn't it? The best way I've got to describe it is RE 1.5 looks like a Romero movie. It looks like it's a contemporary building. It doesn't require any sort of any leaps of faith as to why are these guys walking around Mansion 1.5. Why are these guys why we have Claire and Leon, and how is it that the police station doesn't seem to have a lot of things that you would expect, like cells, for example, and bits and pieces, like 2 cells for all of Raccoon City, for example, doesn't seem feasible, that sort of stuff. And I think a lot of it comes down to the game just feels really gritty, and some of it, obviously, is going to translate from the fact that all of the footage is obviously ages old, and as a result, isn't the best quality. But the actual game, in terms of the sheer sort of clinical cold surfaces everywhere, if you actually look at the section where the cells are, just in terms of kind of how foreboding and sort of grimy that area is in the actual thing, with the arms coming out of the windows as you walk down the corridors, that sort of stuff. When you're actually in the rooms and everything. And obviously we'll get onto the soundtrack and stuff. That doesn't hurt whatsoever for building that atmosphere. But the whole thing just feels really, really contemporary, but also really edgy is the best way I've got to describe it.
Yeah.
And I think it's something where you can very easily imagine yourself in that situation. It's in no way, shape or form is it abstract. It just doesn't feel like the same way as Resident Evil 2 feels, where it's a bit kind of, okay, so I'm walking around this area here. I can't envision this is how this place actually looks. Whereas this game really does feel like you've literally just dropped in a place that you could easily imagine. That's what that's what a police station looks like. And then even, I think actually, if anything, like the remake of RE2 is more a nod towards 1.5 in a lot of ways, in a lot of places, than it is Resident Evil 2. If you actually look at it and sort of, the overall feel of what it feels like. I think it was very ahead of its time in terms of what it is. And I think as someone just said it in the chat, I absolutely agree. The direction the series would have taken after this would have been dramatically different.
Right. Yeah.
I've got no other way of saying it. It just feels like it's got a whole different energy and spirit to it. If anything, I think this would have been... Do the best way of describing it? It feels a lot more like a Silent Hill survival horror game than it does a Resident Evil survival horror game. And I think that's the best way I can describe it. It's just cold, foreboding. It just wants to eat you up alive, and you feel like you're surviving it. It just feels really, really raw.
Yeah, it's interesting because like you said, the RPD and the finished RE2 is a little bit illogical, but not so much that it takes you out of the game. In fact, the sort of strangeness to it adds to its own atmosphere, but 1.5 doesn't necessarily have that too much. It relies more on the fact that this is a more recognisable kind of location, which plays more into a kind of last stand desperation sort of feel more than anything, which is accurate because this version of Resident Evil 2, and you talk about the future of the series, I don't think Capcom would have let Resident Evil die on 2 games. But the intention from Shinji Mikami at the time was that this would close it. He didn't want to make a sequel anyway. He doesn't make sequels. That's not really his thing. So this was intended to be the end, the follow-up of all the fallout of all the events of Resident Evil 1. It was gonna end with this, and you get that impression from the atmosphere. Steve, how do you feel about the overall look of 1.5?
The aesthetic, so to speak.
Yeah.
Honestly, I like Sherwin said, Carpenter movie, like Assault on Precinct 13 or something. Like, it feels very. I mean, the goal was to make it look like a realistic police station. Unfortunately, I would argue this hurts it. Like the annihilation that's gone through the actual like RPD in RE2 proper, or the finished RE2, has a lot more charm for me. Like this is not a bash on the people who've worked very hard to resurrect this project, right? But I would argue that the actual police station of 1.5, in its realism, kind of sucks some of the charm away, if that makes any sense.
Right.
Overall, though, I like it as an actual location, or unfortunately, the build I played, the nature of the product means it's kind of vacant most of the time, which is a shame. I would have liked to have seen what the finished enemy layout and item layout may have done to add the character, like the files, the lore, that kind of stuff as well. But yeah, aesthetically, it's fine. It feels like, I don't know, because the build I played, I'm not sure if I could say what's like fan-made and what's definitely from that disc. How much of that would you say is from the disc side, from what you know?
So apparently the Magic Zombie door build that's playable, downloadable ROM and stuff is not the 70 or 80% completion. It's a 60% complete game that they've built upon. So I guess bear that in mind.
Oh, no, that's fair. It's because a lot of the places remind me of RE1 in a way, particularly like the lab corridors in RE1, kind of blank slate to them. Like I said, it's not terrible by any means. It's just I kind of appreciate more what's come after, which is strange because that's kind of the paradox. Like beforehand, 1.5 was something I always wanted to try. Now I'm glad I have. But I don't know if I'm going to go back to it. I'm sure we're going to go over this properly later.
Interesting.
Do you know, if I can quickly jump in there, and this will be a very unpopular opinion, I suspect. I almost wish there wasn't a playable version of 1.5. I think the charm and the majesty of what that is, and again, much like our friend Facebook Steve here, I love that name. Much like my friend Steve here, I simply put, this is in no way, shape, or form like anything saying that the people who are currently working on this, putting in a lot of hard work into making this mod, no slight on them whatsoever. And absolutely, I 100% get why you would do it. But from my own personal perspective, I almost feel like a slight bit of the charm is absent when you know that you can play it. And it's not even necessarily that we have a version that we can play. It's more so much the bit where you're building on it. I think it demystifies the whole thing quite a lot.
Right.
Yeah, peering behind the curtain.
You've got it. And it's almost like if you could just imagine if you had like the 60% version or whatever, and you can wander around and you can sort of see these areas for what they were in a proto sort of state. That's really cool and that's amazing. The bit where you suddenly go, now we can actually walk around and they're building things in based on what they think it would look like. At that point, it kind of starts to be like, yeah, but this isn't the same vision.
Right.
This is the vision of other people, and they're trying to second guess how this would look or whatever else. And I'm just not really sure that, for me, I like this mythical thing where everyone knows it existed and we're all hunting out footage of it wherever we can find it. It's this idea of, what could be? And it's this amazing mythical thing that's just out of reach. That feels much more exciting to me than this thing that's kind of been built on and doesn't really, very awkwardly fits into the whole everything else.
No, I get that completely. For what it's worth, there is a vanilla version of this ROM that they haven't done anything with. So you can play that one and play the sort of very unfinished version. But yeah, it's a struggle to get around because it's so unfinished. You're climbing up boxes that aren't there and walking through walls and that kind of stuff. But I get your point totally. The allure, the mystery is sometimes better than not knowing. I mean, if I wanted to use a Resident Evil analogy, there are plenty of people out there that want to see Hunk as a protagonist for a game, and for me, no, I'd rather him just be a shadowy background figure. Blanks, you don't need to give him all the backstory and all that. Sometimes not knowing is the fun. Adam, how do you feel about the overall look and design of 1.5?
Straight off the bat, I'm going to 100% agree with Sherwin on my thoughts of 1.5, but the look is very interesting because it's very much at odds with Resident Evil 2. I feel like outside of the character models, I feel like the character models would look at home in Resident Evil 2.
Right.
But, I mean, not only... It's an entire palette swap.
Yeah.
Resident Evil 2 is very brown and orange and has those kinds of hues to it, more warm hues. Whereas this is very blue-green, cold hues all the way through, very utilitarian kind of corridors and such. And, without any real set dressing, as it were, or very minimal. It's like Resident Evil without the flair. One of the things I love about Resident Evil is the attention to detail, and there's posters and every room feels like it just has a wealth of let's change that, not a wealth. Every room in Resident Evil to me almost tells a story.
Yeah.
You see, blood stains or like a bookshelf, whatever, knocked over and everything on the floor, and everything tells a story. Whereas with this, not only is it not really Capcom's work, it kind of is, but at the same time, it's a lot of fan stuff as well. It doesn't tell any stories to me as I see it going. I don't see any struggles, or it's just like a big empty area, which is fine. I understand what it is. It's not a finished game, and I wouldn't ever even call this a fan/developer tech demo almost.
Right.
But yeah, it's, to me, I don't know. I don't get a lot out of seeing it going because of my experience with, the original trilogy and their just wealth of detail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say I land pretty firmly in the middle, to be honest. I think the backgrounds are amazing to look at in the sense that, it's that thing that we've talked about all these years. And it's amazing, and it blew me away to actually be... Because I played the original League, the kind of unplayable sort of vanilla-ish one now, and it's struggled to get around. So actually getting to move from room to room in the most recent version was amazing. Like, to actually walk around this place that I've thought about so much and seen so much about online. And it was amazing to be playing a quote-unquote new fixed camera angle game in the series. Nostalgia and everything aside. But, yeah, the backgrounds, they're very much pale in comparison to what they did with RE2, especially the stuff that's kind of similar. You can see the sheer level of detail difference, as you guys have mentioned. All the environmental storytelling and the sheer attention to detail it's something else. And this is probably something that's going to come up several times in general, but 1.5 is such an accurate name because it really does feel like a midpoint between the two games. The models are pretty good. They're not quite as good as RE2, but they're not really far off either. The fact that they can have wounds appear over time was a really cool touch, and that's nice. But at the same time, there is a lack of overall, detail. There's less going on the walls and the floor. RE2 is just full of stuff, whereas, not so much in this blue RPD. So let's stay with aesthetic. and let's talk about audio. And I know everyone is excited for us in the podcast chat to talk about the soundtrack to this game. So once again, I'm going to kick the ball to show and to start this one off.
It's amazing. I wish every soundtrack sounded this way. No, it's to be fair, and this really goes back to what it is. I mean, obviously they reuse some of the tracks. Okay, he adjusts himself in his chair because this is going to be a long one, guys. I'm going to bore
Go for it.
So obviously they used the biggest thing, the biggest simple change they had is the presence of the marshalling yard audio, and that was the police station theme almost in a lot of places.
Mm-hmm.
And it just sounds morbid, it sounds cold, it sounds clinical, and just so eerie, but also so foreboding. Like there's this sense that you really have this incredible disconnect to like, yeah, you're walking around this police station and it just feels like there's just something. It's almost like, I think it's even like you sort of have this distorted sound that could almost be playing over the tannoy kind of thing or whatever else. Like there's just this kind of eerie kind of, could be the wind, could be something howling in the distance, could be something just in your imagination, whatever else. It just feels really kind of like you are just thoroughly immersed in this situation and kind of just feeling really uneasy all the time. And I think that's the biggest thing, simple change you have in it. But at the same time, obviously the prominence of what that is, but at the same time, there's a lot of tracks that when they did reuse them that you do hear, like especially some of the boss fight stuff or some of the other bits. I mean, there's a couple of things I noticed listening to it recently. One is there's much more weight to it. I don't mean that in the sense that it's heavier, like heavy guitar or anything. I mean, it just sounds deeper. It sounds like there's much more of a tie between some of these tracks than the sort of heavy violin or orchestral pieces you would have had in RE1. Even on tracks that are actually reused for RE2, they've sort of made them feel lighter. Like they actually feel heavier. They feel like there's more depth to them. They just feel like there's a lower kind of level they go. Which is really interesting because it kind of ties you back to something like the first floor and the second floor stuff in RE2, where you have that sort of very mournful kind of piece of music that kind of just sort of drag out and kind of sort of give you this sort of creeping dread or this suspense. Same sort of thing going on here. And then that actually then, when you actually start listening to some of the other tracks and the boss fights and things, you start to hear refrains creep back in. The boss fight music actually makes a lot more sense in RE 1.5 than it does in 2. You don't have that operatic kind of thing hammering at you whenever you see kind of, Birkin rocks up. You actually have like this, it sort of returns to that eerie refrain over and over. And it just has that sort of continuity, I think, that you don't necessarily have in the actual finished RE2. There's kind of more where it actually returns and kind of plays through. Overall, I think that the crucial words I can add to it is, again, it adds to how mournful, it adds to how eerie and thoroughly disturbing the game sort of potentially has. And it's interesting because obviously there's lots of elements in it where you don't have, like the RE2 soundtrack as is a masterpiece, no question about otherwise. But you don't have those sort of silent tracks like the second floor where it just sounds really, really kind of, again, you've got creaking, you've kind of got like, the hint of sound at the edge of your sort of, edge of your audio, all that sort of stuff. You don't have anything like that in the RE 1.5 engine. And it might well be because they weren't all the way through the game. They hadn't actually put that stuff in. It might well be that they had all that stuff in the can. They just never applied it to the game before it got cancelled. We don't know. It's the same with what you guys were talking about with the actual with like the lack of posters and the storytelling going on. Like they may have just built like, this is how the corridor's going to look. This is our working version. We'll add all the detail stuff in it, in the last pass.
It's possible, yeah.
So there's lots of stuff like that where you don't know necessarily what they would have added in and how that could have worked out. But overall, and I think I've spoken at you enough now, the audio track, it's a masterpiece. It's I'm so glad that a lot of it got reused in RE2. The stuff that didn't, I mean, there's a reason why. There's a couple of funky soundtrack bits. The save music in particular sounds really odd. I'm not about when you actually have the gorilla boss fight music. That sort of choppy changing kind of string instrumentation, but the rest of it feels good.
Yeah, there's some definite points to pick up on. I think looking up the soundtrack again, a lot of people sort of refer to the leitmotif, if you like, as the Birkin theme. Sort of like those, whatever it is, 6 notes, and they're fairly prevalent in RE2, but at the same time, if someone hummed you that tune, you could be forgiven for being like, I don't know what that is, unless you're like a super fan. Whereas, yeah, in 1.5 it shows up a lot. And in terms of stuff like the marshalling yard, what I find so funny about that is that particular piece that was intended for basically the beginning of the game, the RPD, is so overbearingly dark that when the final RE2 came, they moved it right, straight before the lab, right, when everything's getting really intense and you're getting to the source and the heart of this evil. It wouldn't have suited the RPD that they went with in RE2. It does suit the one in 1.5 arguably, but it is like, where do you go from there? And the other one that I just wanted to shout out myself is Wreckage of the Mad Experiment, which is another track that they got completely reused. Basically, I think it's unchanged from 1.5 into RE2 as well. And then after that, it basically gets co-opted for the Umbrella Chronicles theme, which is really funny to think this song has obviously been kicking around quite a while if it was for the RE2 beta and it survived this long. Adam, how do you feel about the soundtrack? Do you have much experience with the OST for 1.5?
I'd be interested to know if much of this was also because maybe the soundtrack is the most finished thing of the whole.
It's certainly possible
experience. And it interests me to wonder maybe if any of it was used from the original Resident Evil. Because I feel like a lot of the unused tracks, they give me a lot of Resident Evil 1 vibes. I'm not sure if everyone feels that way. Maybe it's just me. But yeah, it's definitely, for me, the standout. Although I don't have a great ear for soundtracks. I'll be honest. I don't. I get caught up in playing games and the soundtrack kind of goes away for me. But I think this is the most accomplished part of the whole experience for me. Is the soundtrack being where it is. I think it's really good. It obviously was more, like I say, more of a finished product, and it shows.
Right.
There's no real big clangers in there, in my opinion. So yeah, I think it's enjoyable, and it's like it's got more of a place in Resident Evil history maybe than the actual gameplay. Maybe that's probably a fair point. It's weird. It's weird to say. Like, I don't know if I'm just gonna. It's the soundtrack. I was gonna throw in a point, but I'll save it for later.
I mean, but no, you're right. Of everything that sort of survived from 1.5 to 2, most of the soundtrack comes across in some form, even if it's been toyed with. So, I guess that says a lot about its longevity and its strength.
Just try playing it without play any Resident Evil game without the sound, and sound is such a big, important part of this series.
Yeah, arguably true, but don't say that to like 12-year-old me that was playing RE2 with the sound off because they were terrified.
That's the only way I was able to beat Super Mario 2. I couldn't beat the last boss. And the last boss music is pretty frantic in that game.
Yeah.
But I switched it off, and literally the first go I did after switching it off, I beat him, and I was like, yeah, no sound from me ever again. But that's not true.
Amazing.
To be fair, that is, going back to oldster kind of roots now, but like that was the era where video games had to step up their soundtracks. Because we had literally come out of the 16-bit era. We'd just come out of stuff like Super Mario and that sort of stuff, where you were kind of, Super Mario World or whatever it was. And you look at games which just don't feel like they're open world. They don't feel like they literally are platformers, or they're very tightly controlled. Resident Evil games were some of the first games that actually made you feel like, wow, I'm actually in a world. I'm wandering around the universe here. There's much more to this. There's depth, there's flavor, there's character. And you feel like, and the graphics weren't quite there enough. It's still like you were controlling people who were made up of a selection of like cardboard boxes glued together. So we didn't actually have like, the sort of idea is there. The visuals aren't quite pushing us up to the level where we can properly immerse ourselves. But that's okay, because now we had like CDs, and therefore we had much, much better soundtrack capabilities. So it really fell on composers to kind of really put all of that stuff in and kind of give us that world. If you look at stuff like Tomb Raider or Final Fantasy, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, all those different things, the soundtracks for those are amazing. And that's because there was so much focus and pressure on them to actually kind of create this incredible atmosphere that the graphics couldn't quite get there to do. but were starting to suggest, and that's really where that kind of built in.
I think you're absolutely... Oh, sorry, Showing, go on.
I was just going to say, I mean, and if anything, the really big takeaway I can obviously point to 1.5 very specifically, if you all think about the first experience you had of 1.5, I guarantee the first thing you're going to remember from watching the trailer is going to be the soundtrack that's actually playing over the top of the visuals as much as the actual visuals themselves. As soon as you kind of hear, like, you remember that blue police station, you remember those zombies crawling around the floor in the offices or whatever else, but you also remember like that marshalling yard theme, and exactly what Si said, perfect. It's so dark. It's wonderful, and I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, you've nailed it. I think there, Show, and the limitations of the hardware at the time meant that it was a lot harder to get emotion out of the game graphically and storyline wise, and the music really definitely stepped up and really told the story. Resident Evil is probably the first game where I really was lost in a game, when I was first playing it, and I was like, I don't really know what to do or where to go from the outset, and no games have done that for me before, and the music absolutely ratcheted up like my suspense. So I think really the music is the star here.
Steve, anything to add to this long conversation about music?
So I'm going to echo what everyone else has said, and pretty much like these stand out for 1.5 for me is probably the soundtrack. As Shown quite rightfully pointed out, the save room theme is kind of the strange one of the bunch. I would argue it's almost like a child-friendly version of Birkin's theme. But when we're talking about audio, I think something I actually really do like aside from the music, which I feel like we've talked about a lot, is just the zombies themselves. They kind of playing this recent build scared the living daylights with the sound effects they were throwing out. Like, they sound way more twisted and malformed than the counterparts in Resi 2. Like, I don't know how to describe it, but the way they made them sound so much more ghoulish, so much more
that's probably
horrific.
Fair. Yeah, I had a moment when I was playing it and you drop into the sewer. It's the first time I encountered the female zombies. That noise made me basically jump. It's such a weird sound.
They're in an office, or I want to say an office. It looked like an office in the RPD, and they're just filled with like 4 of those zombies. I noped out of that room because of the sounds they were making. And then the regular zombies and stuff, they all sound like possessed. Obviously the gun sounds and everything, they sound as punchy and stuff as ever. And the OST, for what it is, I think is pretty strong and consistent. It's like, strangely enough, it feels like a halfway house between Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2 somehow. Funny that. Because there are points where the tone dramatically shifts. Just listen to the OST itself. Like, compared to RE2, which I say is mostly consistent, except for the boss themes. Yeah. Corridor 3F feels like it could have been the mansion basement's twin brother from RE1. Like, that kind of eerie, haunting, like, sickening feeling to the soundtrack. Marshalling Yard, obviously, phenomenal track. Kind of agree, it's probably not the best for the police station, but for the 1.5 police station, it kind of works in that 80s horror movie kind of way. Does that make sense? Overall, the sound design is actually, I don't know how much of it is on the fan side part, but I have no complaints. The Man Spider sound as well, like, that's just weirdly gets under your skin. Like, that stuff is pretty solid. Where if the aesthetics are rough, the sound's not so much.
Right.
Maybe for the gorillas. Yeah. That's my take anyway. But besides the stuff we've already liked.
No, that's a great point. I mean, we talked about music. We didn't necessarily talk about sound. So I'm glad you brought that up. And the Man Spider, which is definitely going to come up in just a bit as well.
And now, reading the file Sewer Manager's Diary from Resident Evil 2 1998, Mercy Space, who you can find at castingcall.club/m/Mercy Space.
June 28th. It's been a while, but I saw Don today, and we talked after completing our work. He told me he'd been sick and dead until yesterday. It really doesn't come as much as a surprise given how long he's been working here. He was swaying like a horse and kept scratching his body while we were talking. I asked if he was hot, but he just looked at me funny. What's wrong with him anyways? July 7th. Chief Iverson has been visiting the lab quite often lately. I don't know what he's doing over there, but he always looks grim. The expression on his face has been even more unsettling than usual. My guess is that it's because of Dr. Birkin's impossible requests. The chief has my sympathies, though. After all he's done for the town, he doesn't deserve this. July 21st. I rarely drink because I'm on the graveyard shift, but I don't suppose I have much to complain about it since this is how I make my living. August 16th. The chief came in late today, looking grimmer than his usual self. I tried to joke with him to cheer him up, but he wasn't amused. He pulled his gun and threatened to shoot me. I was able to calm him down, but that guy has some serious problems. He knows he can't enter the lab without my help and my medal. Is this what it means for the chief to serve and protect? August 21st. William informed me that the police and media have begun their investigation on Umbrella's affairs. He said that the investigation will be citywide and that there is a possibility they'll even search through the sewers. He asked me to suspend all Umbrella sewer facility operations until the investigation has been concluded. The sewer will still be used for passage, but he stressed that I have to be extremely cautious and that I lose my job if anyone finds out about this operation. What the hell is going on anyways?
Sticking with you, Steve, obviously you and I have played the most up-to-date version as well. What did you think of the sort of gameplay? Again, for me, obviously, I'm going to keep saying it, it did feel gameplay-wise a bit like a halfway house between 1 and 2. Did you get the same sort of impression? Yeah,
I had to look up how to like modify, because you can change your loadout, can't you, and kind of like mod in weapons.
Right, yeah, obviously being that it's an unfinished fan build, you can hit some buttons and mess around with your inventory, and that way you'll get to play with the full extent of what items and weapons do work. Some weapons crash the game, unfortunately, because they weren't fully coded in, but you get a good look through of what you can mess around with.
Do we know if the handgun was intended to not be able to kill zombies but only waylay them? Because that actually kind of seems, in a weird way, a interesting mechanic.
I've no idea. No, I've no idea.
Because the handgun won't stop anything. It has to be something decisive, like a shotgun or a magnum. And that I kind of find kind of cool. Like, it almost feels like that's what Remake 2 kind of did. You know, and you could put like 15 rounds in a zombie's head, and if your RNG's not on your side, that sod still might get up.
Right, yeah, they are pretty good at keep coming back to get you. 1.5, definitely much more bullet spongy.
Yeah, and there's more than one type. I mean, they're pretty much fundamentally in RE2. You've got 3 in RE2, but 2 of them are more like 1 but stronger. You've got your male zombie, you've got your naked zombie, and then you've got your female zombie. In this, there's 3 different types of male zombie. I don't know how many different types of female ones there are, and they have different speeds, and that in itself is kind of cool.
Right.
Like, I don't know if they do more damage, because at that point I was just like, huffing first aid sprays like they're going out of fashion. The gorillas are kind of rubbish. Like, they're just annoying. They don't look visually very interesting. If this was meant to be this season's Licker or this season's Hunter, it definitely goes against the game. The dogs, they seem like they are just the RE1 dog sprite. I mean, I don't know how much difference there was between 2 and 1s. The standout though, I think the standout is Man Spider. It's that thing that it just looks awesome.
So since you've brought us this way, let's generally talk about enemies. In fact, Nick Swain asked, "Is the human spider the best BOW never to make it into Resident Evil?" Well, what I will say is they're definitely creepy. And I would agree with you, Steve. I do feel like the giant ape was kind of meant to be, maybe not the Licker, but sort of like the game's version of the Hunter.
Yeah.
And, they're kind of cool. The way they move, they can hang from the ceiling and stuff is neat, but there's not really a whole lot to them. Whereas the man spiders are like the chimeras on steroids. They appear in the lab. And yeah, they'll mess you up. They're pretty weird looking. The only thing I can think that more personally for me creeps me out more is the Spider-Man, funnily enough, from RE0, the thing that kind of was apparently designed to sort of like latch on to the back of one of the players and basically possess them and take control, which is, that's pretty messed up. But yeah, the man spider stands out as one of the most interesting drops creatures. Adam, how do you feel about the sort of enemy roster in this game?
I mean, obviously everything looks worse. And I believe that's, from what I could gather, is because they were trying to do more enemies on the screen.
Yes, yeah.
The apes are horrible. To me, they're just, I don't like them in any way. I like the fact that they can hang from the ceiling, much like a licker could. But they're trash. I don't like them. They look stupid. They're
massive angry brown circles.
Yeah, exactly. They're just so. I mean, I know it's Resident Evil and it's weird to say something's out of place, but they feel so out of place. Like how many? Like, I just don't get it. The spiders are cool though. They're pretty freaky, and I will definitely echo Sai's sentiments of the Spider-Man being way scarier. Like a weird spider that parasites itself into your body at the back and controls you. It's messed up. But yeah, other than that, it's hard to talk about them because we're talking about essentially a beta build.
Right, yeah.
Birkin looks very odd. His face is very hilarious in this.
The Grey Hulk.
Yeah.
And he also says Sherry, which is
says Sherry.
interesting.
Yeah, he's looking for Sherry.
Actually, he says Sherry. W in there.
He does say Sherry. Yeah, he does say Sherry. Sherry, can you defend the old school 1.5 Birkin at all?
I can't defend Birkin whatsoever. And I certainly can't defend the gorillas either.
That's fair.
I feel like unfortunately the gorillas for me I 100% agree with Adam. They are something where Resident Evil is a game, like, I think increasingly as the series has gone on, like, you start to see more that kind of pushes you. We've talked about this before. It pushes your kind of leap of faith, how much you're willing to kind of invest in this and go, okay, so that's a thing that could happen. And I think that's especially stark if you're an old school fan who loved the originals and that kind of had that whole survival horror element sort of drilled into you, and then you suddenly get yourself to like RE4 and there's a really big jump to kind of leap of faith to kind of go, okay, so this kind of doesn't feel like the same thing anymore. And I think the gorillas are a really good early example of that. Like, why are there two gorillas running around? Why are they here? Oh, because they're mutant gorillas that were being transported in a truck. Okay, no.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funky, but I think the real start, and I agree with you, the spider would have been awesome. But so a couple of things. Firstly, there are 9 different types of zombie in RE2. There's 10 if you include Brad. Just throwing it out there because you mentioned how many.
I meant physical types, not asset colours.
Oh, no, that's cool because in asset types there's technically 3. There's the standard zombie, the crawling zombie, and the naked zombie.
Yeah.
You could tell I have researched this thing for other reasons. but absolutely. In terms of, I mean, arguably Brad is just a naked zombie with clothes on, to be fair. But, that's exactly what he was. But I think the biggest thing for me is that I loved what they were going to do with the zombies. Like, there's all the footage that we've already seen of, like, you bring down the shutter, it severs the zombie in half.
Yes, yeah. That's cool.
Like, kind of the idea that you can blast its head off and the zombie keeps on staggering towards you and kind of tries to bite you. I mean, it doesn't do any damage, but how horrific is that? You shoot the thing's head off and the corpse is still wandering towards you with the arm. It grabs you before it falls down to like nothing. That sort of stuff is really, really cool. They really wanted to push what the zombies could actually do in this. And like, yes, we've seen them kind of juddering and suddenly sort of moving at different speeds and stuff. You hit the nail on the head, though. They're just so unpredictable. I love the idea that this early in the series, they would have created this idea that your standard weapon is just going to hold these things back. It's not going to kill them. Because then you could almost imagine playing this game going, man, there were like 6 zombies in that corridor. I don't have the ability to stop them. I barely made it through before I used up most of ammo just to stop them getting me. I really don't want to go back, but I know I have to because that's the place where the locked door was. And really being scared to go back. All the while, you've got this dark, foreboding music playing at you. And for the most part, you're just going, I don't get horrible.
That's probably why there's so many weapons in this game.
Right, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and that makes sense. So if that's how it was, really, really good.
Yeah, there's like 4 different handguns, several shotguns. There was grenades in the game, all kinds of stuff. in my research, apparently that was part of the issues and why it was scrapped. Is that after a certain point, it was too actiony. It didn't feel like Resident Evil anymore, which is obviously quite funny to say at this point in time.
Did you ever try and use those grenades in combat, Si? Just out of curiosity.
I actually didn't. You know what? I didn't. I've seen them be rubbish, though.
Like, you can roll them a meter in front of you, or you can throw them 3 miles away. Either way, you're not hitting the target. They're worthless.
So did it not work as well? Did it not work as well as the guy in the in Resident Evil 3's intro, where you got the UBCF guy using grenades as a melee weapon? If you remember,
that probably would have been better.
I feel like he fared better. He hit the zombies at least. Like,
right. I mean, apparently that was
climb in this as well. We didn't mention that.
Yeah, that's true. They can climb up ledges and stuff like that. So you see that in the sewer. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, there was definitely some balancing issues which caused it to be cut down dramatically for RE2, which obviously was more of an action game than the first game. But yeah, 1.5 was something else. Different armor that you could have as well equipped and stuff like that. So
remember, you used to your character show damage as they took it as well. Like
yeah,
if you got stuff, your blood stains on you and things.
Which is cool.
It affects rod animations as well. Like, if you get wounded and you leave yourself idle, your character will feel the wound. That's kind of cool.
That's neat, because I still feel like the games without the stagger, which is basically just RE1, it's missing something retroactively. And I felt the same way about 1.5, even though it did have the visible wounds. It wasn't entirely clear to me if I was on caution or danger or what. But apparently I should have just left myself on idle then, I guess.
Side note, that is not 1.5, but how cool it would have been if Leon had his pimp strut that he has in the Game Boy Advance version. I'm sure you guys will have seen.
We'll do that episode at some point. I kid, there's no way. So we talked about enemies. Let's talk about characters. So there's a whole host of characters. In fact, maybe more, but about the same. And RE2 has a pretty large cast anyway. You got a few randomers that probably aren't even really worth talking about. Sherry's in it, but she doesn't have nearly the same amount of gravitas to the story. She doesn't really have an arc. There is Leon's senior officer, apparently, Roy, who kind of acts more like Marvin, since Marvin in this game gets a larger role. Ada is Linda in this game, an Umbrella researcher who's recently thrown in a jail cell. Stuff like that. But we'll go around the room and talk about favourites and least favourites. But first of all, protagonists. This game, obviously, it's not Leon and Claire. It's Leon and Elza. Who wants to start with the Elza Walker talk? Is this more of better that it's left a memory? Because people still campaign that they want to see Elza in the RE canon in some fashion. So much to the point where we got her costume in the Resident Evil 2 remake. Adam, how do you feel about Elza Walker? Any particular feelings on this character, or is there not enough to go on, do you think?
I mean, in all honesty, I feel like this whole section for me, I don't have a lot to say. There isn't a lot to go on with any of the characters. I feel like the fact that we got an Elza Walker costume in Resident Evil 2 relegates her from any Resident Evil now.
Probably.
Because they're like, here you go, here's the thing. I like her, though. I would like to see her in a game. She's interesting enough. She kind of got robbed, even though she's not a real person. It's my belief, or it's my understanding, that Claire was introduced because they wanted it to have a link to Resident Evil.
Right.
And as such, Elza kind of got the shaft.
I'm trying to work out.
We could have seen like a Leon Redfield, Chris's brother. It could have gone the other way.
Yeah, maybe that's a really interesting theory. I have a hot take. It was hot, quote unquote, to drop about Elza. I'm wondering when the perfect time for that is. Steve, how do you feel about Elza Walker?
Oh, I kind of want to hear the hot take first.
I mean, I can if you like. I mean, I can do it.
Come on.
So there's people out there, right? And people out there want Elza Walker. I've seen people, and I don't want to call anyone out accidentally. I saw a tweet the other day from someone who said that in their headcanon, the friend that Claire is talking to in Remake 2 at the beginning, that's Elza Walker. I was like, that's a cool idea. Sure, why not? But people really cling on to this character. And obviously, I'm a massive Claire Redfield fan. And I think they made the right choice as well to come up with a character that ties the series, the second game, into the first game and makes it feel more like a franchise rather than just two games with a similar title. But between Elza Walker and Claire Redfield, I assume it's between, but at one point Elza Walker's name was something else. And I assume it's between when they came up with the idea of linking the second game to the first game. At one point she was going to be Rachel Speyer, the cousin of Forrest from Resident Evil 1. That is a whole lot better for me. I would have taken that over Elza Walker. I think that's a really cool, not in your face link
nod.
So if you ever bring out, if it ever happens that Elza Walker strides into the canon, nope, she has to be Rachel. Forrest's cousin would be so much cooler.
Yeah.
Rachel,
that's my mild hot take.
Rachel did make it to the canon, but sadly she changed her name after her brother's death and then died on the Queen Zenobia. Rachel Foley.
Brad Vick is his twin brother who rides a skateboard, and he's just called Rad Vick.
Right. So
go ahead, Steve.
My thoughts on Elza then. Like, we don't really get we get bits of a character from script, but we don't get much from dialogue, do we? Like, actual spoken dialogue. The script makes her sound like she's somewhere between Claire Redfield and Jill Valentine.
Probably fair.
And she's kind of bland, like bland as bland porridge, from Planet Bland, which is a shame because her aesthetic, her design, I actually like it more than Claire's, the racing gear and stuff. Very impractical, but it kind of looks.
Is it impractical?
Well, maybe not for a zombie apocalypse. But,
exactly. Having levers on, to your neck, super good.
As a solo entry into the RPD, power sliding a bike through a shutter while being chased by zombies sounds amazing.
It's Alice 1.0.
Oh, no.
No, but other than that, there's nothing to go on. She's got a cool design and potentially a cool entry, and otherwise she's bland as... Yeah, I can't swear on the podcast. you get the idea.
I think that's just because of where the game is, though, Steve. Honestly,
no
that's
one
fair.
Has
anything. It's just a sea of blandness.
I know. John may or may not be Kendo is hilarious. I got a bit, but I'll be fine. Oh, hi Elza. I didn't see you there, and all this dumb stuff. Like, I can see him being moderately sexist Kendo.
Very much so. Did you get to see the scene where he has to shoot Roy, by the way?
Yeah, it's
where
just so
Roy
goofy.
just runs at him and he just goes boop and falls down in one shot. Made me chuckle.
And then he pulls please, I have to be alone now.
Yes, gets a Marvin line.
Yeah, it's
peculiar. Yes,
I can believe the headcanon that she's meant to be Claire's friend, that everyone said on the phone. But to introduce her now, the only way I would do it is simply take that jumpsuit, make a random blonde face, and put her in Resistance, where she's sitting on a cannon.
That's a great idea. Sherwin, what are your thoughts on Elza and the general cast at large?
Sure. I think it dawned upon me, by the way, the greatest Resident Evil enemy that never made it into the game, which is Golgotha.
Oh, yeah, that's true, yeah.
We managed to both miss both of the bosses, but my god, the concept art for Golgotha looks terrifying. It's like a Godzilla monster came to life.
Right,
super awesome.
And I never knew.
In the end.
I never knew for sure, because there's obviously talk that Annette was going to transform. It was that going to be her, and I don't know, but it's really interesting to look at that concept art.
Yeah, so Zeram, I think that's probably the pronunciation of it. Looks a little bit more goofy. It's kind of like a Plant 42 kind of, a Plant 43 kind of vibe, or an Ivy vibe, depending on what name you want to give it. But Golgotha looks terrifying. But anyway, I think with Elsa, to be honest, for me, she doesn't really exist as a character. She basically, in my head, she's just Claire Redfield, but with a different skin, effectively. Because so much of Claire's character in Resident Evil 2, anyway, comes from her interactions with Sherry.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of saying, Sherry didn't really have much of a story, is exactly why Elsa didn't really get much of that herself.
Yeah, that's very
I
true.
can envision if you give Sherry the same sort of level of story and the same sort of attention to detail, I'm pretty sure Elsa's reactions and interactions are exactly the same. And you've literally just got, and she's just got a different head. So I think that's all what it was. I totally get where they come from, continuity. I mean, technically you already had that with Ada, but that's obscure. Not many people are going to get that from the lore perspective. It's not as obvious as I'm looking for my brother Chris right from go.
Right.
But But I don't know. I feel like if you were going to make Elza Walker now, you would make her as a very distinctive character. Like you'd have the skin somewhere, she'd turn up, and you'd just have her as kind of much more of a probably a slightly younger, kind of more youthful feeling character, more of a daredevil kind of vibe. I mean, she was supposed to be like a sort of championship racer or something or other.
Yeah, at 19. So she must be a badass.
Yeah, so she's going to be kind of quite daredevil-y, and I think that's a very different energy to what Claire brought to the game. But I feel like that's the sort of way you would go if you were going to create that character now and sort of put her in somewhere. I really like the idea of the nod. I don't think that's what Capcom intended, but I think it would have been really fun if it would have been as literally Claire just go, hey Elza, how are you doing? On the
that would have been
amazing. that literally would have just made everyone go, oh, that's really cool. You guys are awesome.
Yeah.
But instead we got the outfits, so can't really complain. Bike levers absolutely would be number one the best thing in a zombie situation.
There we go, Adam.
This is true.
Yeah. Wait. What?
That's what I said.
I know.
And although to be fair, like, hey, how are you gonna get to the police department? I'm gonna skid in underneath the metal grill on a motorbike, which is presumably gonna explode in the background somewhere as I walk away like a boss.
I say the imagery makes you like she smashed through, not just slided. She went through it. That's
I feel like the actual audio to that probably would have been the special end credits after you finish the guitar playthrough where the bass line comes in. That's what would have happened as she kind of enters the police station.
So, Sherwin, how do you feel about the rest of the supporting cast? Because obviously, a lot of them are familiar, but with some drastic changes in places.
Yeah, do you know the biggest one for me is the Chief. I really like the original image of the Chief. He just, like in terms of all the way down to like his outfit, like he just feels so much more at home than the police chief did from Brian Irons does in his reimagined RE2 version.
100%.
He just this kind of character who's kind of like the sort of the father figure to the police station going, look, I'm obviously mortally wounded, but I'll hold down the fort. You guys just keep going. And this idea that Leon keeps coming back to his office, the guys are on his bench, like, wounded or whatever, and he's kind of just going, look, just save everybody else. He fits so much better, like, as that sort of vision. And then you can almost imagine that heartbreaking scene where you kind of go there and like, okay, we're getting out. And it's much like Marvin in the remake, where he's just like, no, my day is over. No, not even that. I can imagine it'd be even better if he was just like, no, it's over for me. Just leave me here. Like, so much more heartbreaking if you can't. Well, he's a zombie. He would have bit me if I didn't leave him. If you actually have this guy, you're like, come on, we can get out. And the guy's like, no, go. Like, I'm not. I'm just going to slow you down.
I've been setting this all.
Yeah, that would be really, really cool because effectively the Marvin character is Roy, isn't he, or DJ? Which way you look at it.
It's like Captain Marvin Irons. It's like a mal. It all mashes up.
Yeah, but I like the image of him, and I think again it's much back to the mysticism of what RE 1.5 is. This kind of re-inversion version where you're like, Brian Irons was really different. Marvin, I imagine, would have been quite different in terms of how he looks. So yeah, it's kind of fun. I mean, I know what you mean about the goofiness of how Roy gets killed by by Kendo / Nick, but the point is is it Nick or John? Sorry,
John.
But he's But at the same time, I mean, you have to wonder again how much of that is beta build versus actually what you would have had in the end.
Yeah, this is true.
Yeah.
But and they possibly would have tightened up the dialogue and stuff. Same with Elza, like saying she's a bit bland. I'm sure they probably would have tightened up the dialogue and stuff.
Definitely, and that's true. What I was trying to say. Yeah, it's really. Sorry, go on. No, I was just going to reiterate that what everyone has experienced of these characters is. None of that was really from Capcom. Little bits of it was. It's a fan thing now.
Yeah.
So, we have no real idea to say other than what we can extrapolate from Resident Evil 2 in terms of like Sherry and such.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Like, I swear I've seen some footage somewhere of Leon on top of the helipad at the start of the game that isn't actually from the fan-made mod, where he's actually got a couple of lines of dialogue.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's the case, and if that is legit, and I don't know if it was or not, but if that's the case, Leon sounds more youthful, but it also sounds much more panicked and much more realistic. Like, Leon is cool as in Resident Evil 2. Like, hey, he's just walking around. Oh, there's zombies everywhere. I'll take it in my stride first day. That's what I do.
That just seems to be Leon throughout the whole.
He's Captain America. He can just deal with this stuff. Whereas the actual Leon you had in kind of in that clip, and again, if that is legitimate, then he just actually sounds like, oh no, I've been fighting off zombies. I'm really shredded now. Like, I'm terrified. Like, and I've started to see people start to die. Still doesn't explain why he's wearing the wrong uniform, but that's not him.
I do like that aspect though, because it sort of plays into the fact that he's working alongside Marvin for a lot of his campaign, so he's got someone to sort of lean on. So it allows him to be a bit more of, be a bit more of a nervous wreck and whatever's going on, like you say, going back to the chief, and to sort of get back to that, like, yeah, I agree. I really like that design. I was flipping through the Resident Evil Archives book earlier just to look through all the concept art one last time, and yeah, I like his overall design and his attitude in that game as not a bad guy really goes with the very little that we know about 1.5 story. I think for the most part, I didn't really have one, to be honest. But obviously, the Resident Evil 2 back then, the story premise was different. We didn't have, Umbrella's got everyone under their thumb. Chris and Jill go back. Irons believes them, and Umbrella gets shut down before Resident Evil 2 starts. That's the beginning of 1.5. So to have Chief as this, this more good guy character, his design, and it all feeds in the story, so it makes sense.
I like the idea if we extrapolate that a little bit to kind of imagine if Resident Evil was kind of actually being made of actors, like the guy who's playing Brian Irons. Man, we changed your script today, Terry. Oh, okay, what happened? Well, you've got a bigger role now. Can you do evil a little bit? I guess so. Like, how evil?
How can you deal with public hatred?
How can you deal with public hatred?
Here's a gun. Just start walking around shooting people in the back.
Yeah.
Adam, how do you feel about this sort of ragtag group of survivors and non-survivors in 1.5?
I mean, it's very Resident Evil. You know, that it definitely sticks to that feel, at least of the early Resident Evils, where it is kind of like a somewhat eclectic cast.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's not enough for me to talk about. I feel like it's so bare bones. I feel like it could have been interesting.
Right,
but
it's hard to say, isn't it? Because there's we don't have a clear idea of what the final script was going to be.
Exactly.
Yeah. And again, as I hear it, another reason why it was scrapped is that they weren't particularly happy with the story. It was very straightforward and very disconnected.
Isn't that crazy that it got to 80% and was scrapped? Like, absolutely. Nowadays, that would probably just be the death knell of a game. Like, it's done.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's release time, and then make the rest as DLC.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
All right, so
I mean, we're pretty fortunate that they they obviously spent a fair amount of money. They even promoted it with images.
Yep.
From this game, this 1.5. So we're lucky, really, that we got Resident Evil 2 as we did. You know, they were willing to scrap it entirely and start over.
Right. I mean, it's strange, isn't it? In some alternate universe, they did that, and the Resident Evil series consists of Resident Evil and Resident Evil Director's Cut, and that's it, which is bizarre.
Well,
go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
No, go on.
I was just going to say, I mean, to be fair, Resident Evil as a series has a reputation for this. I mean, if you look at Resident Evil 2 is obviously Resident Evil 2 and 1.5 is the first instance of this. If we go to Resident Evil 3, you've suddenly got, well, actually the first build we made of this became like, Devil May Cry.
Right,
yeah,
4.
Right, and sorry, 4 even, yeah. And then we kind of go.
They had the Hookman.
Yeah, you've got Hookman. There's loads of stuff in the Resident Evil series where you start looking at different versions of this thing.
Right, and that's absolutely why the difference between calling this episode Resident Evil 1.5 and beta builds Resident Evil 1.5 is because we've got a few of these games we can dive into, and as I said at the beginning, it's wild. I don't know any other series that has got multiple games that got this far into production and were shown off to people before they got scrapped.
I think it speaks to the strength of how Capcom regard this. Resident Evil games, absolutely. If you're Capcom, Resident Evil games, perhaps until the advent of Monster Hunter, Resident Evil games are really something where I imagine they are a passion project at Capcom. Like, actually getting to work on this must be like the game that everyone at Capcom wants to work on is the next Resident Evil game. Like that's like your Super Mario. And I imagine at that point, there's a thing where special rules are made, special dispensation happens. Like, hey, this game really doesn't work. Okay, that's fine. chuck it out, we'll throw everything at it to make it work because it's Resident Evil and that's our brand. That's what we've got to make
turn
work.
This one into Devil May Cry.
This one becomes Devil May Cry. This one can be this or whatever. That's the focus of what I think they want to go with it. I imagine that's the case because, I mean, imagine it, put yourselves in this situation. You've literally just had Resident Evil 1 come out. It's a massive runaway success. It's spawned an entire genre of new games. You know that other people are creating their copycat versions of this thing, and you want to make the definitive version of this thing. Chuck it out there and be like, "Yep, we know what we're doing, and it wasn't a fluke, and we're going to launch a series of these things now, and really capitalize on this because this can be our next big thing."
Right.
Yeah, this is our next Mega Man.
Yeah, exactly. I think we've arrived sort of to conclusion and final thoughts quite appropriately, and I think it does loop back to sort of the beginning of the show when we were talking about the best-selling Capcom games, and the vast majority of the ones we talked about in that big list. It's a big old Resident Evil game, so yeah, it's hugely important to Capcom. And at the end of the day, it's the right decision if you want to make the right product. It doesn't matter how far in you are. It's time to go back to the drawing board if it isn't working, especially in such a crucial time, like you mentioned. All the other copycats that were already coming out of the woodwork. For me, they made the right decision, and I think we're all probably going to unanimously to say they made the right decision. The RE2 that we got, and it's so strange to think that they got this so far into a game, scrapped it, and the game they came out with is this unending masterpiece. It's still heralded as one of the best games in the series, one of the most important games in the genre. Sometimes in the conversation for one of the best games of all time. So that's what, in fact, makes 1.5 even more strange and special, is that it's attached to this legendary game. The game that never was, before the game that overshadows so many. I think what's so cool also about Capcom is that they are just sort of very hands-off with what's going on. Like the 1.5 thing, it's out there in the wild, fans are working on it, and they're very aware of it. It's pretty clear they're aware of it. But they're just not really that bothered about taking anyone to task with it seems like. And the general attitude to a lot of things seems to be that way. They're not really interested in making 1.5. They're never going to bring out 1.5. It's not going to happen. So why not let the fans just sort of, have their cake and eat it? So I think that's good on them for that. But at the end of the day, they made the right decision.
I could back you up a little bit with that. Capcom are the most super chill, awesome people, like in the games development world I think I've ever encountered. Like those guys are just like, they're just fans of the stuff they do.
Exactly.
They are literally just video game fans. Like they like you chat for them so long. I've actually sat there chatting to these guys well into kind of like stupid in the morning about one of the release parties, just going, "Hey, let's talk about Resident Evil," and just talking about save room music, like literally that for an hour and a half.
I love that,
and it's just great. Like that's they're really invested in that stuff. Like the biggest thing I can say about the Capcom members of staff that I have encountered, they literally are fans like you or I, and that is so refreshing and so cool. It's not just this is our cash cow. That's not who they are. So I've never asked them about 1.5, but I imagine a whole bunch of them get a kick out of people liking it as much as the people like it.
Yeah, I bet they'll be like, "Oh, did you see this? Did we see this back in the day?" Steve, what are your final thoughts on 1.5?
Well, first off, I want to say thank you to the people who've made the MZD build.
Right,
that's a piece of hard work that I think. If I were in their position, I probably would be more dedicated to reverse engineering and making my own game at this point. It's a museum piece.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a piece of history that you can actually walk around in, and that's phenomenal. The game that we got after, that's the game of all time, isn't it? RE2.
Yeah.
But 1.5 as its own creature, as its own organism, the fact that it's got a legacy, that it's got a story, it's got the actual history of acquiring a copy is itself an adventure, which I highly recommend you seek out and read because, my God, that is more its legacy, I think, than the actual game now. Like, the game itself, it's okay. Right. It's got some good ideas. It's got one banger of a soundtrack for the most part. But it's more than the sum of its parts, which is good because if this is like an indicator of how the final version would have been, I don't think the Resident Evil franchise would still be around. I'm going to be honest. Looking at what we see, what you play with, it's not as strong. And I feel like Mikami was right that for Kamiya's first outing, making him actually go back to the drawing board and scrap it, and the fact they all did is amazing.
Yeah, it's really interesting looking at sort of like interviews around that time as well. And Kamiya said, at the time when it happened, he thought he was going to get fired because Capcom basically ordered him to go back to square one with it. But he also said that it was an experience he needed to have, and obviously he's gone on to be pretty damn successful in his own right since this, and this is his first experience as a director, and for all intents and purposes, speaking from Mikami's point of view and speaking from our way less important point of view, but having played what we have and seen what we had, it was probably the right call, So it's crazy to think the history of the game is definitely more important than what is the final product or what is the final product plus fan-made adaptions. But shout out to everyone over at the Magic Zombie Door, Martin Biohazard and all those folks. Just being able to walk around this strange alternate reality was such a cool experience, and I'm glad that we got to do that before we sat down and did this episode. Adam, what are your final closing thoughts on 1.5?
I think much like the best horror experiences, what you necessarily don't see is more effective than what you do see. And I feel like that could be the case here. It grew, it was such a big thing before people got hold of it that I think that's really what carried it. What we necessarily didn't see. I feel like if back in the day this had been like a year and suddenly we were holding this product, we'd be like, thank God it didn't turn out like this, So I feel like it really did help that it was such, I want to say, I can't even think of words now. It was like a legend, a myth kind of thing.
It's a white whale.
I feel like time helped that, and now it's allowed to be almost bad, if that makes sense. Like, I don't particularly enjoy it as much as some of you guys, but it's okay because it's part of a very big history. So it's like it's enjoyed a lot more in that sense.
Yeah.
And I and especially to the people rebuilding their vision of it, that's like amazing. Good work to them, And I'm hoping that someday soon they will have a finished build that they can be proud of and be like, "Hey, we did it."
Mm-hmm. As much as
possible.
And then
Capcom can strike.
Don't joke, it's happened before with other franchises and other theories.
But this is actually like the point that I wanted to make about Capcom, just sort of like letting them do it. Look at it doesn't really happen. Like, not in my experience. Maybe someone could prove me wrong, but with Capcom, I've never really seen it. We've had Daymare content on our channel. We were lucky enough to be given a free code for Daymare before it was out, so we could play it early and make some content on that months ago now. But and that's an example of a Resident Evil project that, sure enough, it got shut down by Capcom because at the time it was a Resident Evil 2 remake, but because a Resident Evil 2 remake was on the horizon and it didn't seem like the right thing. So they, as a show of good faith, that team got invited to the Capcom offices.
They didn't kill that.
Oh, yeah.
No, exactly. They gave it their blessing to turn it into something else.
The ground.
Right. They didn't destroy them. They just said, can you not put our name on this right now? Yeah.
Exactly.
So I think that's such a great view of Capcom. It's a real...
I think there's a reason that you don't hear Capcom in the same way as you hear like EA, but all these companies that are unscrupulous and are loot box heavy and stuff, and Capcom has never really felt that. Right. And I think that's to the credit. I think that they are they're definitely one of the older companies on the scene, Yeah. But also I think they're genuinely fans of their product.
Absolutely.
And I think that's why we don't get such gouging type things from them.
Yeah. And Sherwin, closing thoughts on 1.5.
I think Steve hit it nail on the head. It's a museum piece. It's an incredibly fascinating and enduring part of Resident Evil's history and of its legacy. I think we can always play the what if game in terms of what would have been if this came out as Resident Evil 2? What would it have been if they didn't change it around? What could it look? I mean, there's too many variables there. We don't know. Yeah, we know that the game was 70% done. We don't know whether the 30% that wasn't done was all the detail included in there, script rewrites, different music, audio tracks. Because the version we've seen of it, the mod they have, there's no necessary reason, as we all know, that I think that roughly builds upwards from a 40% build that they actually had.
Yeah,
and they've built up from that. So I mean, that's missing whatever the extra 30% was of chunk of stuff just missing, which we simply don't know what that stuff was. And that's even if you then believe someone at Capcom or whoever saying, "Oh, well, it was 70% built." Like, there's various different ways we can look at that. So I think there's lots of unknowns. My general feeling is that if they had released it, it would have been Dino Crisis in terms of its level of interest that the community would have had for it. Right. The general amount of kind of enthusiasm that would have greeted it and the sort of enduring legacy. So it remains kind of a cult classic, but does it spawn a whole series of new games? No. I suspect that's possibly what would have been of this thing. But then, you don't know.
Yeah.
Because similar sort of things to Dino Crisis, large areas of Dino Crisis felt quite sparse and quite lacking in a lot of detail. And there were clever moments that you remember and go, "Oh, that's really smart." But then at the same time, Resident Evil 1.5 is a very similar sort of feel to that in a lot of ways. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's a game which I think has got this incredible legacy to it. It's got this incredible myth around it. It's got this insane kind of thing of you can never talk about old Resident Evil games without talking about this thing. And I think as a result, it's just got this incredible charm. It's this wonderful what if. It's this thing where, as a Resident Evil fan, you just literally want to grab people who don't know anything about Resident Evil and tell them all about it, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God, let me tell you about this thing that almost happened or whatever else. And it's gonna. I think the best way to describe it is that it's that sort of late night horror movie from back in the 90s that you always meant to go see but you never did. And it's kind of that that random release, that cult classic that you never quite got around to watching. That's the way I kind of see it.
I think it speaks volumes that if you were to go on YouTube or whatever, and you're looking up sort of like general Resident Evil videos, Resident Evil trivia or whatever, Resident Evil channels, number one, did you know that Resident Evil was based off a game called Sweet Home? Yeah, okay. Number two, there was a game called Resident Evil 2 that wasn't Resident Evil 2. That's, and everybody's covered it because it's such a interesting part of the Resident Evil history, which is why it's probably our most requested episode of all time. Several people have asked me, are you going to cover 1.5? So I think we did a pretty decent job of it. Nothing else remains for me but to thank our contributors. If you'd like to be part of the show, then please look into auditioning for our file readings. One way to get in touch is to email us at faspraypod@gmail.com. But of course, the best course of action is to join our Discord server where you can discuss Resident Evil with us and other fans and listen to the podcast live as it's being recorded. The link to the server is in the description of this podcast and also on our social profiles. You can follow us on Twitter at FASprayPod, on Instagram at FASprayPod, and on Facebook at facebook.com/FASprayPod. You can find the podcast on YouTube, Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, and if you enjoyed the show, please do leave us a review where you can. It helps spread the word. Our next episode will see us explore another reality, another alternate universe, if you will. We have the Anderson-verse, but what about the Perry-verse? In the first episode of Book Club, we'll be giving our thoughts on the first in S.T. Perry's Resident Evil novelizations with the Umbrella Conspiracy. Thank you to the panel. You can follow all of the Pueblo people individually. I'm at Siniac_123. Steve is at Firebutton Games. Sherwin is at Sherwin's Agenda. Adam is at AdVicker01. And finally, thank you for listening and have a good week. Just a whole episode about music.
Damn straight.
I am absolutely down. I don't know how
I
we
know,
do it,
that's-
but I'm absolutely
that
down.
Could we
sounds
play
like- that sounds like a
clips
Sherwin one.
from each track and be like, "This one's a certified banger"?
I think that sounds like a Cy and Sherwin episode if ever there was.
Yeah, let's do
Yeah,
it.
right.
I think, to be honest, I think in anything else, you could just have a discourse that's really, really sensible on the strength of the soundtracks and the various different games.
Yeah, we could just go from game to game and just talk about highlights and lowlights.
Because you can absolutely bet your ass I'm going to bore the crap out of all of you on this episode talking about RE 1.5 soundtrack.
Oh no, people honestly, before you even were on, were like, oh, they better talk about the soundtrack. I was like, don't worry, Sherman will be here soon.
You better believe it. I'm here for the soundtrack. In preparation for this episode, did I watch the game? No. Did I play the game? No. Did I listen to the soundtrack all day yesterday? Yes, I did.
Nice.